It started with an innocent text from Emma, my childhood friend and resident whirlwind of chaotic charm. Her message read, "Come to a party with me tonight. Trust me, you'll never forget it." I had no idea how right she'd be. It was a Friday evening, and my week had been a brutal cycle of deadlines and disappointments. I wanted to say no. Curling up with a glass of wine and reruns of The Office sounded safer, easier. But Emma's persistence was legendary. She knew exactly how to twist my arm. "Fine," I texted back, rolling my eyes. "But this better be worth it." The house stood on a quiet suburban street, its white brick facade glowing in the amber light of street lamps. It didn't look like the kind of place where wild things happened. That was my first mistake, assuming I knew what kind of night this would be. Inside, the atmosphere hit me immediately. A heady mix of muted conversations, soft jazz, and the faint clink of glasses. Strangers lounged in plush armchairs, their laughter low and inviting. Emma grinned, pulling me through the crowd with her usual confidence. "You didn't tell me this was a different kind of party," I whispered, my cheeks heating as I noticed a man in the corner wearing nothing but a satin robe. I shrugged. "Details are boring. Just relax. No one's here to judge." I wasn't sure about that. My black cocktail dress suddenly felt too tight, my heels too loud on the polished hardwood floors. I clutched my glass of wine like a lifeline, my eyes darting around for some kind of escape. And then I saw him. He was leaning casually against the bar, his dark skin illuminated by the warm glow of the pendant lights. Broad shoulders, a quiet confidence in the way he surveyed the room. His smile was easy but unreadable, and when our eyes met, something in me sparked, a thrill that traveled from my chest straight to my core. "First time?" he asked, his voice smooth and low as he closed the distance between us. I nodded, unable to summon words. My heart thundered against my ribs, a mix of nerves and curiosity. "It's not as scary as it looks," he said, offering me a reassuring smile. "Just take it at your own pace." I swallowed hard. I didn't know what I was walking into. His laugh was rich and warm. Most people don't. But that's part of the fun. Emma drifted back into my periphery, her laughter cutting through my haze of nerves. "I see you've met Marcus," she said, winking at me before vanishing into the crowd. Typical Emma, always leaving me to fend for myself. Marcus extended his hand, and before I could think twice, I took it. His touch was firm, grounding. "Shall we explore?" he asked. I nodded again, letting him guide me deeper into the house. The rooms blurred together. Elegant furniture, dim lighting, bodies moving in slow, deliberate dances. I felt out of place, but Marcus's steady presence kept me tethered. He spoke in low tones, pointing out details that I would have missed. A subtle laugh, a fleeting glance, the way the air seemed to hum with unspoken possibilities. For the first time in months, I wasn't thinking about my endless responsibilities or the ache of loneliness I'd grown used to. Instead, I was alive, hyper-aware of every sound, every movement, every breath. And when Marcus turned to me, his eyes holding mine with quiet intensity, I felt the beginnings of something I couldn't quite name. The wine buzzed gently in my veins as Marcus led me into what felt like another world. A room bathed in amber light, where the air was thick with laughter, warmth, and something electric I couldn't quite name. A long leather couch curved around the room, inviting and intimate, with couples lounging and chatting as though they'd known each other for years. Marcus guided me to a seat on the couch, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his body. He was calm, his presence magnetic, but his gaze carried a question, a challenge almost. I could feel the weight of it as I sipped my drink, trying to steady my pulse. "Tell me," he said, his voice low enough that it sent shivers down my spine. "What do you think so far?" I hesitated, my eyes scanning the room. A man and woman sat across from us, their laughter soft and flirtatious. The way his hand rested on her bare thigh wasn't possessive but instead inviting. I swallowed hard, trying to find words. "It's different," I managed. "But not in a bad way." Marcus chuckled, his fingers brushing mine as he leaned closer. That's a safe answer. You don't have to hold back here. My cheeks flushed as his eyes searched mine, daring me to let go of my usual restraint. For a moment I thought about standing up, about finding Emma and making a quick escape. But instead I took a deep breath and stayed put, my pulse quickening. The conversations in the room ebbed and flowed like waves. I watched as one couple slipped away through a side door, their departure as smooth as it was understated. Another pair, seated nearby, leaned into each other, their whispers dissolving into soft laughter that felt intimate and untouchable. And then I felt it. A subtle shift in Marcus's energy, the way his hand lingered against mine. He didn't push, didn't rush. His touch was steady, his patience magnetic. I realized then that the tension in the room wasn't just physical. It was emotional, too. Everyone was here for their own reasons, their own explorations. "You're overthinking," Marcus murmured, his breath brushing against my ear. I turned to face him, my words catching in my throat as his dark eyes held mine. For the first time in a long time I felt seen. Not judged, not labeled, just seen. "What if I'm not ready for this?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Then you don't have to be," he said simply, his hand withdrawing as if to prove his point. "But something brought you here tonight. Maybe you're more ready than you think." His words lingered in the air between us, heavy with truth. I wasn't sure what to say, so I let the silence stretch, let myself feel the quiet intensity of his presence. Time seemed to blur after that. The moments spilled into each other like spilled wine, messy and intoxicating. At some point, Emma reappeared, her cheeks flushed with excitement as she dragged me toward another room. "You've got to see this," she said, her voice alight with mischief. The space Emma led me to was dimly lit, its walls lined with mirrors that caught fragments of movement and reflected them back at odd angles. The atmosphere was intimate, charged with a hum of energy that made my breath catch. I wasn't sure how it happened, but I found myself in a circle of strangers who felt like friends after a glass of wine and a shared laugh. Marcus was there too, his presence grounding me even as the world around me seemed to spin faster. A man with sandy hair and a devilish grin leaned in, his voice warm and playful. "First time?" he asked, his tone echoing Marcus's earlier question. "Is it that obvious?" I replied, trying to mask my nervousness with a wry smile. He chuckled. "Not at all. You've got the perfect mix of curiosity and caution. It's charming." The compliment caught me off guard, sending a rush of warmth to my cheeks. The man introduced himself as David, his easy confidence both disarming and enticing. He spoke with a kind of charisma that drew people in, and before I knew it we were laughing and exchanging stories like old friends. At one point, I glanced across the room and caught Marcus watching me, his expression unreadable but intense. It sent a thrill through me, a reminder of the unspoken connection we'd shared earlier. The night unraveled like a dream, one I couldn't quite control but didn't want to wake from either. I danced between conversations, between glances and touches that felt deliberate yet fleeting. Every interaction left me breathless, a little more open, a little less certain of who I was when I walked through that door. And as the night deepened, I found myself wondering, what would I take from this place? From these moments? I didn't have an answer yet. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid to find out. The night grew heavier, the air thick with laughter, teasing glances, and the kind of tension that made every touch feel amplified. I floated through it all, tethered only by the wine in my hand and the subtle pull of Marcus's gaze from across the room. Emma, of course, had disappeared again. She had that way about her, slipping into the heart of the action without hesitation, leaving me to navigate uncharted waters alone. But maybe that's what I needed. "You seem more relaxed now," Marcus's voice startled me, soft and low at my side. He held a fresh glass of wine, offering it to me with that steady smile that I was beginning to associate with safety. "Maybe I'm getting the hang of this," I said, taking the glass and letting our fingers brush just long enough to feel it. His smile deepened, and I felt a flicker of something hot and unexpected. Good, he said. You should let yourself enjoy it. I wasn't sure what he meant until someone tapped me on the shoulder. It was David, the sandy-haired man from earlier. His grin as infectious as ever. Care to join us for a game? He asked, nodding toward a table where a small group had gathered. I hesitated, looking to Marcus for some kind of approval or reassurance. He just gave a slight nod, his expression unreadable. Sure, I said, feeling a strange mix of apprehension and excitement. The game was simple enough. An icebreaker of sorts, designed to bring people closer. Questions passed around the circle, growing bolder with each round, the answers punctuated by laughter and stolen glances. What's the wildest thing you've ever done? David asked me, his eyes gleaming with curiosity. I laughed nervously, twirling my glass in my hand. This might be it, I admitted, earning a ripple of amused murmurs. First time at a swing party, huh? One of the women chimed in. She was stunning, tall and statuesque, her confidence radiating like heat. Don't worry, it's always overwhelming at first. But the best experiences happen when you let go. Her words lingered, echoing the ones Marcus had spoken earlier. Was that what tonight was about? Letting go. The questions continued, and so did the wine. The room seemed to pulse with an energy I couldn't ignore, a kind of collective rhythm that made every glance and every touch feel like a promise. At some point, Marcus leaned closer, his voice brushing against my ear. You're starting to understand, he said, his hand resting lightly on my knee. The contact sent a jolt through me, not because it was unexpected but because of how much I wanted it. My breath hitched as his thumb traced slow, deliberate circles against my skin. I should have pulled away, but I didn't. Around us, the room felt like it was dissolving, the edges of reality blurring into something softer, more intimate. I barely noticed when David moved closer, his smile warm and knowing. You're captivating, he said, his eyes holding mine. I laughed, the sound shaky. I think the wine might be talking. No, he said, his voice dropping an octave. It's not. For a moment, I was caught between them. Marcus's steady hand, David's intense gaze. It was dizzying, the kind of thrill that made my skin tingle and my thoughts scatter. You're safe here, Marcus murmured, as if reading my mind. Nothing happens unless you want it to. His words steadied me, grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. I took a deep breath, letting the warmth of the moment seep into me. And then the world shifted again. The group began to disperse, some drifting toward other rooms, others disappearing entirely. I found myself moving too, led by Marcus and David into a quieter space where the energy was less chaotic but just as charged. Are you sure this is what you want? Marcus asked, his voice soft but firm. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I looked at them. Two men who seemed to embody everything I wasn't. Confidence, ease, the ability to live without second-guessing every decision. Yes, I said finally, the word barely a whisper but heavy with certainty. What followed was a blur of sensations. Light touches that built into something deeper. Glances that held promises I couldn't fully understand. Time seemed to stretch and compress all at once, each moment slipping seamlessly into the next. I felt free in a way I never had before. Liberated. Beautiful. And yet, somewhere in the back of my mind, a quiet voice whispered of consequences. The room's air felt charged, as if every glance, every word spoken carried a weight I couldn't fully grasp. Marcus and David stood on either side of me, their presence a steady hum against the storm of my thoughts. The others had faded into the background, leaving us in a bubble of quiet intimacy. You're overthinking again, Marcus said, his voice a soft reprimand. His hand found mine, grounding me with his steady warmth. David smiled, stepping closer. You don't have to analyze everything. Just be. I wanted to resist, to cling to my usual need for control, but the pull of their words, their proximity, was stronger than my doubts. Slowly, I let myself lean into the moment, surrendering to the energy between us. The space seemed to dissolve, my focus narrowing to the way Marcus's hand brushed against mine and the way David's gaze lingered, heavy and knowing. They didn't rush me. There was no urgency in their movements. It was as if they understood that this wasn't just a game for me. It was something deeper, something I wasn't yet ready to name. Marcus leaned closer, his breath warm against my ear. "Are you sure this is what you want?" he asked, his tone more serious now. I nodded, unable to trust my voice. "Then let us show you," he said, his hand guiding me forward. The night unraveled in layers, each one more intoxicating than the last. Their touches were light at first, exploratory, as though they were waiting for me to set the pace. It felt natural, unhurried, and yet every moment was laced with an electric intensity that made my heart race. Marcus's voice was a constant, soothing presence, grounding me when my thoughts threatened to spiral. "You're safe," he said, his words anchoring me in the whirlwind of sensations. David, on the other hand, was all quiet confidence, his every move calculated but unforced. Together they created a balance that felt almost surreal, a delicate dance of trust and exploration. As the night deepened, I felt myself letting go in a way I never had before. The boundaries I had clung to so tightly began to blur, replaced by a sense of freedom that was both thrilling and terrifying. I woke up the next morning wrapped in a haze of warmth and contentment. The memories of the night before were vivid yet dreamlike, each moment etched into my mind like a series of snapshots. The house was quiet now, the laughter and music replaced by the soft hum of morning. I stretched, my body pleasantly sore but my mind racing. For the first time in a long time, I felt alive, as though I had rediscovered a part of myself that had been buried beneath years of routine and responsibility. But as I dressed and prepared to leave, a nagging thought began to take root. What now? I glanced at my phone, my finger hovering over Emma's name. She would know what to say, how to make sense of everything that had happened. But I hesitated. This felt too personal, too raw to share even with her. Over the next few weeks, life returned to its usual rhythm, or so it seemed. I threw myself into work, avoided Emma's knowing looks, and tried to convince myself that what had happened that night was just an isolated experience, something to look back on fondly but never repeat. But then the nausea started. At first I dismissed it as stress. I was overworked, not eating properly, and the flu had been going around the office. But when the dizziness hit one morning, leaving me clinging to the bathroom sink for support, I knew I couldn't ignore it anymore. The test was positive. I stared at the little plastic stick in disbelief, my mind racing as the implications sank in. I hadn't been with anyone else in months, except for that night. Panic bubbled in my chest as I tried to piece together the fragments of that evening. I had been careful, hadn't I? But the truth was, in the haze of wine and laughter and shared intimacy, I couldn't remember every detail clearly. Ooh. The question echoed in my mind like a taunt. There were no easy answers, no way to untangle the web of connections that night had created. For days, I avoided Marcus's and David's texts, unsure of what to say. How could I tell them? What would they think? In the end, I decided to reach out to Marcus first. He had been the calm one, the anchor. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it was him. His response was immediate and supportive, though I could sense the shock behind his words. "We need to talk," he said, face to face. The conversation was awkward at first, filled with pauses and unfinished sentences. But as we talked, I realized something unexpected. Marcus wasn't angry or dismissive. He was kind, understanding, even protective. "We'll figure this out," he said, his hand covering mine. "Whatever happens, you're not alone." His reassurance was a balm to my frayed nerves, but it didn't erase the uncertainty that loomed over us. There were still so many questions, so many unknowns. And yet, as I looked at Marcus, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this wasn't how I had planned for my life to unfold, but that didn't mean it couldn't lead to something beautiful. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of emotions: fear, excitement, doubt, and moments of unexpected joy. Marcus stayed by my side, his presence a constant source of comfort. We never did figure out exactly what had happened that night, or who had played the pivotal role in this new chapter of my life. But in the end, it didn't matter. What mattered was the life growing inside me, a reminder of the night that had changed everything.